The human shielded the alien girl from arrows. Every scar became a reward. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The wind howled through the trees, and the cold was almost unbearable as Commander Jack Hunter stood at the edge of the battlefield. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the alien girl, Zara, struggle to avoid the deadly arrows flying toward her. She was surrounded by enemies, her eyes filled with fear, but also something else, something that made Jack's pulse quicken. Without thinking, Jack charged forward, instinctively using his own body as a shield to protect her from the arrows. They sliced through the air, some grazing his arm, others hitting his back, but Jack didn't stop. Each time the sharp pain of an arrow piercing his skin reminded him of the danger, but he kept moving, determined to keep Zara safe. Zara was a Zaralian, a species known for their beauty, their intelligence, and their unique abilities, but also for their vulnerability in battle. She had been caught in this war with no way to defend herself, and now, Jack was her only hope. As the last arrow struck him, Jack finally reached Zara, pulling her to safety behind a large rock. They were both breathing heavily, and Zara's eyes were wide with shock. She had never seen someone, especially a human, risk their life like that. She had never felt so helpless, so completely dependent on another. And yet, here was Jack, standing between her and certain death, despite his own wounds. Why? Why would you do that? Zara whispered, her voice trembling. Jack looked at her, his face grim but determined. Because it's the right thing to do. You matter. You're worth saving. Zara stared at him for a moment, not fully understanding what he meant, but something in his voice, in his actions, told her that he wasn't just protecting her out of obligation. It was something deeper, something human. Jack could feel the weight of the arrows embedded in his body, but there was a strange sense of fulfillment too. He had protected someone, and that was enough. As the battle raged on around them, Zara reached out and touched his arm gently, her expression softening. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. But I want to, Jack replied. You're not alone anymore. They both knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Zara felt a sense of hope. Every scar Jack earned today, each wound, was a reminder of his sacrifice, and in the end, it would be a reward, because in saving her, he had shown what humanity truly was, selfless, brave, and full of compassion. Jack could feel the blood seeping through his shirt, the cold air biting into his exposed skin as he leaned against the rock, trying to catch his breath. His entire body throbbed with pain from the arrows that had pierced him, but he didn't mind. He had done what needed to be done. Zara was safe, for now. The battle around them was far from over, but for a moment, everything seemed still. Zara, still shaken by the intensity of what had just happened, slowly turned her gaze from Jack to the battlefield. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had just transpired. Humans, she had been taught, were a primitive species, driven by their emotions and often reckless in their decisions. Yet, Jack's actions had shown her something else, something she had never witnessed before. He had risked his life without hesitation to protect her, a stranger, someone from a completely different world. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or guilty. I don't know what to say, Zara whispered, her voice soft but sincere. Jack glanced at her, his face calm but the exhaustion in his eyes unmistakable. You don't need to say anything. I did what anyone would do. Zara shook her head, not quite believing him. No one had ever put themselves in harm's way for her before. The aliens she knew, the ones she had grown up with, were pragmatic. They would have weighed the risks, calculated the odds. But Jack had just acted, instinctively, without thought for his own safety. But you were hurt, Zara said, her voice trembling. Jack waved it off, as if it was nothing. I'll be fine. It's nothing. But Zara could see the way he winced every time he moved. She couldn't ignore it. You should get those wounds treated, she insisted. Jack gave a small, pained smile. I'll survive. We need to focus on getting out of here first. His words were true, but Zara could see the blood staining his shirt, the way his movements were growing slower, more labored. She didn't know what to do. For the first time in her life, she felt helpless. I don't understand. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's eyes softened as he looked at her, a quiet understanding in his gaze. Because you matter. Because every life is worth protecting. His words struck Zara deep, in a place she hadn't realized needed healing. All her life, she had been taught to rely on her own strength, to trust her own abilities. But Jack had shown her something different, that sometimes true strength came from helping others, from putting someone else's needs above your own. She had never known that kind of selflessness. Thank you, Zara said softly, her voice catching in her throat. Jack nodded, his usual bravado fading as the pain from his injuries began to set in. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess. But Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. A bond had formed in the heat of battle, forged in the fire of sacrifice and mutual respect. As the sounds of the battle raged on in the distance, they knew they had to move. Jack couldn't stay here, not with his injuries. And Zara, though grateful for his help, knew she had to find a way to repay him. She wouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Let's get you out of here, Zara said, her voice filled with determination. Jack managed a weak smile, nodding slowly. Lead the way. With that, they moved, their footsteps silent on the cold ground, the bond between them growing stronger with every step. Zara knew that their journey was far from over, but she also knew that with Jack by her side, there was hope. The scars on his body, the pain he had endured, would not be in vain. They would be the reminder of what had been sacrificed for something greater, a bond that transcended species, a promise to protect one another no matter the cost. The trek through the desolate terrain was grueling, the cold wind biting at their exposed skin as they moved swiftly but cautiously through the rocky landscape. Jack's injuries were slowing him down, but he refused to let Zara carry the burden of their survival alone. He had shielded her once, but now, it was time for them to rely on each other. Zara walked beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the environment. She had never felt so vulnerable, but with Jack by her side, something shifted within her. The fear that had once dominated her thoughts was now replaced with something else, trust. Zara had never placed her trust in another being the way she was beginning to trust Jack. She knew he had risks of his own to manage, yet his focus remained on her safety, even now. We need to find shelter soon, Jack said, his voice strained but resolute. I can't keep going like this much longer. Zara nodded, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the horizon. A faint glow in the distance caught her attention. There, she pointed. That should be a safe place. Jack followed her gaze, his eyes squinting as he searched for the same sign of hope. Let's move, then, he said, determination edging his voice. They pushed forward, each step bringing them closer to the distant glow. As they drew nearer, Zara could see it more clearly, an ancient structure, half buried by time and neglect. The faint light emanated from cracks in the stone, and Zara felt a flicker of hope stir inside her. They reached the entrance, and Zara led the way inside, her senses heightened. The interior was dark, but the faint glow illuminated just enough to make out the outlines of old stone walls and collapsed ceilings. It was cold inside, but it was shelter. Jack staggered as they entered, and Zara quickly moved to his side, supporting him as best as she could. He collapsed onto a stone bench near the far wall, breathing heavily. You should rest, Zara said, kneeling beside him. I'll keep watch. Jack shook his head. We're in this together, he replied, his voice hoarse but full of resolve. I'm not going to rest until you're safe. Zara looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never known anyone, alien or human, who would put another's safety above their own like this. It was strange, yet comforting. The way Jack was unwavering in his commitment to protect her, even at the cost of his own well-being. You're not like anyone I've ever met, Zara said quietly. Jack gave her a tired smile. And you're not like anyone I've ever met either. There was a brief silence as the reality of their situation settled in. They were both survivors now, bound by a shared experience that had changed them in ways they couldn't fully understand yet. Jack's breathing slowed, and Zara could see the exhaustion weighing on him. She moved to his side, gently applying pressure to the wounds she could see, doing her best to help him feel more comfortable. You're going to be fine, she murmured. We'll get through this. Jack's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The war, the pain, the fear, it all seemed distant in that one shared gaze. It was as if they both understood, without needing words, that they were no longer just two strangers from different worlds. They were allies, friends, and something deeper was beginning to grow between them. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Zara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jack smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "You'd have made it. You're stronger than you think." Zara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Not stronger than you." Jack didn't respond, but his eyes said everything she needed to hear. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zara allowed herself to rest, knowing that with Jack by her side, they could face whatever the future held. The night passed quietly, the cold wind still howling outside, but inside the ancient structure, Jack and Zara found a rare moment of peace. Jack's wounds were still painful, but the immediate danger had passed, and with each passing hour, he could feel himself recovering, albeit slowly. Zara had managed to find some old medical supplies inside the ruins, and although the supplies were far from ideal, they were enough to patch him up for the time being. She moved carefully, wrapping his injuries with makeshift bandages, her hands steady despite the situation. Jack watched her, noting the quiet strength she displayed. She wasn't just physically capable, but emotionally strong as well. It struck him how much he had come to rely on her in such a short time. "You're doing great," Jack said, his voice still raspy from the earlier exertion. Zara paused and looked up at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I don't feel great," she replied softly, her gaze meeting his. "But thank you." There was a moment of silence, and for the first time since their encounter, Zara allowed herself to relax. The danger wasn't gone, but it was manageable for now. They had a chance to rest, to recover, and that was enough. Jack leaned back against the cold stone wall, the pain in his body slowly ebbing away. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said after a while, his voice serious. Zara nodded, sitting down beside him, the weight of their situation settling over her. "I agree," she said. "We can't stay here forever. We need a plan." Jack looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I know," he said. "But right now, the most important thing is getting you somewhere safe. We'll figure the rest out after that." Zara didn't reply at first. She knew he was right, but the thought of being protected, of relying on someone else for safety, was strange to her. For years, she had been taught to rely on her own strength, to never show weakness. Yet, in Jack's presence, she felt something different, something she couldn't quite explain. It was a sense of trust, something she had never experienced before. Jack noticed her hesitation. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice gentle. "You're not alone anymore." Zara looked at him, her eyes softening. She had spent so much of her life trying to survive on her own, but now, she found herself questioning that. Could she truly allow herself to depend on someone else? Could she trust him as he trusted her? "I'm not used to this," Zara said quietly, almost to herself. Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to be. You just have to trust me, as I trust you." There was a warmth in his words, a sincerity that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I trust you." Jack's smile widened, and for a moment, the weight of their journey seemed lighter. "Good," he said. "Then we'll get through this together." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant howling of the wind outside. Jack couldn't help but reflect on the strange bond that had formed between them, a bond that seemed to transcend species and even logic. He had never been the kind of person to rely on anyone else, but with Zara, something had changed. Maybe it was the shared experience, the mutual understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. Or maybe it was something deeper, something that neither of them fully understood yet. "What now?" Zara asked after a while, her voice breaking the silence. Jack looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Now," he said slowly, "we rest. We plan. And when the time is right, we leave." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "We have each other's backs. That's all that matters." Zara nodded, her heart feeling a little lighter. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something more. It was about trust, friendship, and perhaps something that could grow into something more. With Jack by her side, Zara felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't going to be easy, and the journey ahead would be fraught with danger. But with each other, they could face whatever came next. They had each other's backs, and that was all they needed. The next morning, Jack awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through cracks in the stone walls of their makeshift shelter. His body ached from the previous day's exertion, but the pain was dull, manageable. Zara was already awake, kneeling by the entrance, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She looked over her shoulder as Jack stirred, offering him a small smile. "Morning," she said softly. Jack sat up slowly, his body stiff from the wounds he had received, but he pushed through the discomfort. "Morning," he replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "Any sign of trouble?" Zara shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "It's quiet, but we shouldn't waste time." Jack nodded. They both knew the risks of staying in one place for too long. The enemy could be tracking them, and the longer they remained, the more vulnerable they became. "I'll be ready to move soon," Jack said as he carefully stood, testing his strength. "We'll leave as soon as we can." Zara rose to her feet and walked over to him. "You're still not fully healed," she said, concern in her eyes. "We can't afford to push you too hard." Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine. We both know we don't have the luxury of waiting." Zara hesitated, then nodded. She knew he was right. Their survival depended on staying ahead of their pursuers. She moved toward the pack they had gathered the night before, checking their supplies. "We should head north," Zara said, her voice firm. "There's a safe zone about 3 days' journey from here." Jack glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're sure?" Zara nodded. "It's the best chance we've got. The route is dangerous, but it's less likely we'll be followed there." Jack's eyes met hers, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. The road ahead would be treacherous, but it was the only option they had. "All right," Jack said, gathering his gear. "Let's get moving." They set out together, the weight of the journey ahead pressing down on them. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, the cold winds cutting through their clothing as they trekked across the rugged landscape. Jack's injury slowed him down, but Zara stayed close by, always watching his back. She could see the way he struggled, but he never complained, never asked for help. She admired his resilience, but she also feared for him. They couldn't afford for him to collapse, not now. "If you need to rest, let me know," Zara said after a while, her voice soft but insistent. Jack gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be fine," he replied, but there was a weariness in his tone that didn't escape Zara. As the day wore on, the landscape around them began to change. The rocky hills gave way to dense forest, the trees towering over them, their branches swaying in the wind. It was quieter here, almost eerily so. Zara's senses were on high alert. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them. "Something's off," she murmured, her eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. Jack stopped, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "What do you mean?" Zara didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. "It just feels wrong." Jack's expression hardened. "Stay close." They continued moving, the tension thick between them. With every step, the forest seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier with each passing minute. Jack kept his focus, every nerve in his body alert, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her instincts told her that danger was closing in, but she couldn't place where it was coming from. Just as she was about to speak again, a sound caught her attention, a rustling noise in the trees, followed by the snap of a twig underfoot. She froze, her eyes wide with sudden alarm. Jack held up a hand, signaling for silence. They both listened carefully, the air thick with anticipation. A figure stepped out from behind a tree, its movements fluid and graceful. Zara's heart skipped a beat. The creature before them was unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall, with shimmering scales that glowed faintly in the dim light, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through them. "Stay calm," Jack whispered, his voice low. "We don't know if they're friend or foe." The creature stood motionless for a moment, studying them with an intense gaze. Then, in a voice that was oddly melodic, it spoke. "You are not alone," it said, its words clear but foreign. "You are being followed." Zara's pulse quickened, and she exchanged a glance with Jack. "Who are you?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the unease growing inside her. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if considering her question. "I am a guardian of these woods," it said. "I can help you." But first, you must trust me. Jack's hand tightened around his weapon, but Zara placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to hold off. We don't have time to hesitate, Zara said quietly, looking directly at the creature. Lead the way. The guardian nodded and began to move silently through the trees, its steps barely making a sound. Without a word, Jack and Zara followed, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them, but the glimmer of hope from their mysterious guide giving them a new sense of direction. The forest grew denser as they followed the mysterious guardian, its silvery scales glowing faintly in the dim light. Zara kept close behind, her senses heightened, her mind still racing from the sudden appearance of the figure. Jack was just behind her, his hand resting on his weapon, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. The deeper they went into the forest, the more the air seemed to thicken, the quiet almost unnatural. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, watching. Zara stole a glance at Jack, her mind swirling with questions. Who was this guardian? What did it mean by saying they were being followed? And how had it known they were in danger? She opened her mouth to ask, but the guardian's voice interrupted her. You are safe for now, it said, its tone calm, yet somehow foreboding. But the threat is close. Zara frowned. What kind of threat? The guardian did not answer immediately. It continued walking, its steps silent on the forest floor. Finally, it spoke again, its voice lower this time. There are others who seek to find you. You cannot outrun them. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. Who are they? He asked, his voice firm but laced with concern. The guardian glanced over its shoulder, its eyes glowing like twin moons in the dark. They are hunters, it said simply. They will not stop until they have what they want. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Hunters. The word carried with it an ominous weight. Who would be hunting them? Why? She glanced at Jack, who met her gaze with a calm, almost reassuring expression. We'll figure it out, he said, as if trying to ease her unease. The guardian led them further into the forest, and soon, the trees began to thin, revealing a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, half hidden by the overgrown vines and moss. It looked ancient, weathered by time and nature, but still standing strong. The guardian moved toward the structure without a word, and Zara and Jack followed. As they stepped closer, Zara could feel the energy in the air shift, a strange hum that seemed to resonate with the stone itself. She couldn't explain it, but something about the place felt different. The guardian stopped in front of the structure, turning to face them. This is where you will be safe, it said. For a time. Jack stepped forward, his brow furrowing. Why here? The guardian's gaze lingered on him for a moment before it answered. This place holds power. Ancient power. Zara couldn't help but wonder what kind of power the guardian was referring to. There was something about it that made her uneasy, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the feeling of safety that seemed to settle over her. The guardian stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. Jack looked at Zara, then at the structure. You trust it? Zara hesitated. I'm not sure, she admitted. But right now, it's the only choice we have. Jack nodded. Then let's see what's inside. They walked past the guardian, entering the stone structure. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls covered in strange markings that Zara couldn't understand. The space was vast, the ceiling high, with ancient carvings decorating the walls. The atmosphere was thick with mystery, and Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though she couldn't see anyone else. Jack moved cautiously, scanning the room for any signs of danger. Zara followed, her mind racing with thoughts of their next move. They had been on the run for so long, but this place, it felt like a moment of pause, of respite. But how long would it last? Zara glanced back at the guardian, who was standing just outside the entrance, its eyes fixed on them. Do not trust it fully, the guardian warned. Stay vigilant. Zara nodded, but as they stepped further into the structure, the weight of the guardian's words lingered. What did it mean? And why had it chosen to help them? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever was coming next, they had to be ready. And they would face it together, no matter the cost. The inside of the ancient structure was both unsettling and fascinating. Zara could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on them as she stepped deeper into the space. The walls were covered in strange carvings, some of which looked like they might tell a story, but they were unlike anything she had ever seen before. She ran her fingers along the stone, the cool surface offering a small comfort. Jack was a few steps ahead, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every crack in the walls. "Something about this place doesn't sit right with me," Jack said, his voice low but firm. Zara nodded in agreement. There was an energy in the air, something almost ancient. It was as if the very structure had a life of its own, watching them, waiting. "It feels like we're being tested," Zara replied. "Like we're not supposed to be here." Jack paused and turned to her, his expression serious. "We don't have a choice," he said. "This is the only option we've got right now. We just have to figure out how to make it work." Zara looked around once more, her instincts telling her that they needed to stay alert. The Guardian had warned them not to trust this place completely, and Zara knew they couldn't ignore that warning. As they moved further into the structure, the air seemed to grow thicker, the sense of being watched intensifying. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps echoing off the stone. The deeper they went, the darker it became, and the feeling of unease settled heavily in Zara's chest. Suddenly, Jack stopped in his tracks. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She strained her ears, trying to pick up on any sound. It was faint, but there it was, a soft, almost melodic humming coming from somewhere ahead. Without a word, Jack moved forward, and Zara followed closely behind, her breath coming in quiet, steady bursts. The sound grew louder the further they went, until they reached a large chamber at the heart of the structure. The space was vast, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, and upon it, an orb. The humming was coming from the orb, which seemed to pulse with a light of its own. It was like nothing Zara had ever seen. The colors within the orb shifted constantly, like the ebb and flow of a storm. Jack's eyes locked onto it, his face unreadable. "What is that?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jack said, stepping closer to the pedestal. "But it doesn't feel like it's just here for decoration." He reached out, his hand hovering over the orb, as if unsure whether to touch it. Zara watched him, her body tense, every instinct screaming at her to stop him. "Jack, wait," she said urgently. "We don't know what it does." Jack hesitated for a moment, his fingers inches from the orb. But then, with a sigh, he withdrew his hand. "You're right. We don't know anything about this place. But we can't ignore it either." They both stared at the orb, the humming sound now vibrating in their bones. Zara felt a strange pull toward it, as if it was calling to her. "Do you think it has something to do with the Guardians?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with uncertainty. Jack shook his head. "Maybe. Or maybe it's something older. Something that's been here long before any of us." They stood there for a few moments, the humming filling the silence between them. It was almost hypnotic, and Zara found herself drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. But as she stood there, her thoughts raced. They were in an ancient, mysterious place, and while Jack's instincts were always sharp, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces far beyond their understanding. "We can't stay here long," she said, breaking the silence. "Let's find out what we can, and then leave." Jack nodded. "Agreed. But we're getting closer to the answers we need. And maybe, just maybe, this place holds the key to getting us out of this alive." They exchanged a look, a shared understanding passing between them. Whatever this place was, it was more than they had anticipated. But they were in it together, and that was the one thing they could rely on. Together, they would face whatever came next. With that thought in mind, Jack and Zara turned to leave the chamber, but not before casting one last glance at the orb, its light pulsating like a heartbeat in the darkness. Whatever lay ahead, they both knew it was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a journey that could change everything. As Jack and Zara made their way out of the chamber, they couldn't shake the strange energy that seemed to cling to the air around them. The humming from the orb had faded, but its presence lingered in their minds. Every step they took in the ancient structure felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. Zara's thoughts were racing. She couldn't help but wonder what the orb had been, what power it contained. The Guardian had warned them of dangers ahead, but something about that orb felt different, like it was calling to them. Jack, sensing her unease, glanced at her, his brow furrowed in concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. Zara met his gaze, her eyes troubled. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's something about that place. The orb. It felt like it was trying to tell us something. Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was just something we weren't supposed to understand. They reached the outer part of the structure, where the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. The forest was eerily quiet now, the sounds of nature subdued. Zara's instincts told her to stay alert, but Jack seemed strangely calm, as if he had already accepted the fact that they were in unknown territory. "We should keep moving," he said. "We've got no idea what's out there, but we can't afford to stop for long." Zara nodded, but her mind was still on the orb. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was tied to the challenges they were about to face. As they walked, the landscape began to change. The forest cleared, and they found themselves standing at the edge of a vast valley, the ground sloping downward into a dense mist. The valley stretched out before them, an endless sea of fog. Jack paused, scanning the horizon. "This wasn't part of the map," he muttered, his voice tense. Zara followed his gaze, her heart racing. The mist was thick, almost impenetrable, but beyond it, she thought she could see something glimmering. "What do you think it is?" she asked. Jack squinted, his hand shielding his eyes from the bright sun. "Could be a settlement," he said. "But it's hard to tell. Whatever it is, it's not on any map I've seen." Zara felt a tug of curiosity mixed with wariness. "We should check it out," she said. "It might be the answer we're looking for." Jack hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing the risk. But then, with a sigh, he nodded. "All right, let's move carefully." The mist grew denser as they descended into the valley, each step taking them further into the unknown. Zara's senses were on high alert now, every rustle of leaves and distant crackle of branches making her jump. She wasn't sure what they were walking into, but something told her they were getting closer to the answers they needed. As they pushed through the fog, the faint glimmer they had seen earlier became clearer. There, through the mist, stood an old stone structure, similar in design to the one they had just left, but larger. It looked like a fortress, its walls tall and imposing, covered in the same strange markings that adorned the structure inside the ruins. "This is it," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is what we've been looking for." Jack didn't respond, but the look on his face said it all. He was thinking the same thing. The structure loomed ahead of them, its entrance dark and foreboding. They approached cautiously, each step heavier than the last. The air seemed to shift around them, the fog thickening as they drew closer to the entrance. Zara could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her, the strange energy in the air intensifying. As they stood at the entrance, Jack turned to her. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. Zara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. Together, they stepped into the darkness, the heavy wooden door creaking shut behind them as they entered. The inside was dimly lit by flickering torches mounted on the walls. The air smelled musty, as if it had not been disturbed for centuries. And yet, Zara could feel something alive in the space, something waiting. As they moved deeper into the fortress, the sense of being watched returned. But this time, it was stronger. Zara's hand instinctively went to her weapon, though she knew they hadn't encountered anything hostile yet. Jack, however, seemed unfazed, his eyes scanning every corner as they moved through the eerie silence. They came to a large chamber at the heart of the fortress, and there, standing in the center, was a stone pedestal. On top of it, an object, an artifact, glowed faintly. It was shaped like a key, its edges sharp and intricately carved. The moment Zara laid eyes on it, she knew it was important. She could feel the pull, the same way she had felt drawn to the orb. "What is it?" she whispered. Jack stepped forward, studying it closely. "It's a key," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "But to what, I don't know." Zara reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the pedestal. As soon as she touched it, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Jack stepped back, alarm in his eyes. "What did you do?" he asked. Zara's breath caught in her throat as the key began to glow brighter, the humming sound from the orb now echoing through the walls. Something was awakening, something that had been hidden for centuries. And now, they were a part of it. The ground rumbled beneath their feet, the air growing thick with a hum that vibrated through Zara's entire body. She stepped back instinctively, her hand pulling away from the glowing key. Jack's eyes were wide, and he reached for her arm, steadying her as the sound intensified. We need to get out of here, he said urgently, his voice tight with tension. Zara's heart pounded in her chest, but something inside her refused to leave. Not yet. The pedestal continued to glow, its light growing brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the ancient stone walls. She couldn't help but stare at it, drawn to the power it emanated. What's happening? She whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the rising hum. Jack glanced around, his body rigid with alertness. I don't know, but it's not good. This place wasn't meant to be disturbed. He stepped closer to her, his expression hardening as the ground continued to shake. Zara felt the weight of his words sink in, but there was a strange pull in her chest, a feeling that this was more than just danger. It was an invitation. Before she could say anything, a deep, booming voice echoed through the chamber, its source impossible to determine. You have awakened the key. The voice intoned, deep and resonant. The time has come. Zara froze, her blood running cold at the sound. The voice was not human, nor did it sound like anything she had ever heard before. Jack tensed beside her, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. What do you mean, the time has come? He demanded, his voice sharp. The voice did not respond immediately, but the air shifted, and the ground stopped shaking. The light from the pedestal dimmed, casting an eerie calm over the chamber. Zara's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The time to awaken has arrived, the voice repeated, this time softer, more direct. The key is meant to open the gateway. Zara's mind raced. A gateway? What gateway? She opened her mouth to ask, but before she could speak, a new sound filled the chamber, a deep, grinding noise, as though stone was shifting. The wall across from them began to crack open, revealing a dark passage beyond. The sound of ancient mechanisms awakening sent a shiver down Zara's spine. We need to move, Jack said, his voice low but commanding. Zara nodded, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the passage that had opened in front of them. Something was pulling her toward it, something powerful and undeniable. Without waiting for Jack's next move, she took a step forward, her hand outstretched toward the dark opening. Jack followed immediately, his steps heavy as they both walked toward the unknown. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to hum with energy. It was as if the very walls were alive, and they were being led into something far bigger than themselves. As they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, and the air grew denser, as though they had entered a different world altogether. The passage was long, stretching further than they could see, but there was no turning back now. Zara felt the key's energy surge through her once again, the same pull that had drawn her to it earlier. She could hear Jack's footsteps behind her, but they were quieter now, as if even he could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The passage opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center, a giant stone archway stood, ancient runes glowing faintly along its edges. Zara's heart raced as she realized what she was looking at, the gateway. The runes on the arch seemed to pulse, as if responding to their presence. Zara stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the glowing markings, but before she could touch them, Jack's voice stopped her. Zara, wait, he said, his tone urgent. She turned to him, meeting his worried gaze. What is it? She asked, her voice low. Jack was looking at the archway with unease. This doesn't feel right. We don't know what it leads to. Zara swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had to admit, there was something about the gateway that felt both inviting and dangerous. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they had no other choice. We have to see it through, Zara said quietly. We've come this far. We need to understand what this is. Jack hesitated, his eyes flicking to the glowing runes. After a moment, he sighed. All right, but we need to stay sharp. Together, they approached the archway, the energy surrounding it growing stronger with each step. Zara could feel her heart beating faster as they drew closer to whatever lay beyond. She didn't know what they were about to unleash, but she knew one thing for certain. Their journey was about to change forever,